through the relatively tiny crypto market. Now, it's not tiny anymore. It's modest size. But in the scheme of the funds that could potentially rush in for some security, whether it's real security or not, at least it's more free market. No bank is setting the value of Bitcoin or anything else. It's free market. We're all setting the value of it. Really, we really are. When it tries to squeeze into the crypto market, you're not going to go an $8,500 Bitcoin up to 10,000. You're going to go 8,500 up to 30 and 60 and 100. That's the kind of flow I'm referring to. So this is I'm not strictly saying that this is what will happen. I'm saying it is certainly a possibility because I'm going to show you a relationship a little bit later on in the slides that supports what I'm talking about. So, there is some credibility to it, I think. And that's what it means for the cryptos. It means that if we're paying attention to the dollar and world politics to a certain extent and realizing that people want away from the central bank control, away from government control, they want their own currency, they want to go into something that has shown far better returns than the stock market, even though we've taken a big hit, and far better returns, obviously, than the dollar. Crypto looks like a pretty strong place to go and is far less regulated. Plus, you can move it outside of the country. You can take it and go wherever you want. In fact, when I'm traveling now, I'm going to be putting some of my money into BTC, Ethereum, Litecoin, and Dash just to protect myself as I cross over borders. Because I take cash as well, and I just want to make sure I'm not completely screwed. And by the way, I've had my bank accounts and cards shut down more times than I can count because I've traveled a lot, and I lived in Brazil in periods of time, and I've traveled through Europe and South America. All the time those cards got shut down. I don't have to worry about that with cryptocurrencies, and I don't have to worry about taking it across borders either. So anyway, that's what it means for cryptos. It means that the light's going to be shining on cryptos. That's what I'm talking about. Right now we're in a treading water phase, which is perfectly fine. And for those of you who are on my list, I said exactly what was happening. We're in a treading water phase with a slight upward bias for Bitcoin and a slight downward bias for Ethereum, oddly enough. And that's more or less what's been happening, which means you're treading water. And that's what's been going on. But that's not a bad thing. That's an accumulation phase that allows the moving averages to sort of settle out, and it's a basing to establish the next move. Now, what is the next move? Is it up or is it down? Therein lies the question. I'm building a case for it potentially being up significantly because of what might be happening with the dollar. So the plan by the bankers and governments to move to world cryptocurrency, or at least a regional one with main control. This would play into this would work for them. Yeah, Ed, it's exactly right. It's exactly right. Diamonds, however, are a high-level security risk. How do I know? My brother-in-law used to sell them, and he had to carry a gun, and his partner got robbed. So you don't worry about that with cryptocurrency. You could be, walking around in a bathing suit and be carrying cryptocurrency with, no problem. You can't do that with diamonds, gold, silver. And I'm a big fan of gold and silver, not so much of diamonds. Diamonds, there's too much variability, and there are really stashes of diamonds in safes all over the world. But gold and silver I'm a big fan of, but I realize the limitations. Which cryptocurrency does not have. And of course, remember, as easy as it is to create a cryptocurrency, and let's face it, it's easy, you then have to gain value in the marketplace. And of course, you can do it by scamming methods, but those typically don't last. The cream tends to rise to the top, and it's all free market basis. And the cryptocurrency has no one's liability, which is one of the biggest issues for precious metals. It's no one's liability. It's strictly an asset. When you own gold, you're not owning a claim on a liability. When you own a dollar, all it is a liability. In fact, it's a massive debt. It's a debt instrument. When you own a euro, massive debt instrument. Everything but maybe the Singapore or New Zealand, a couple of other currencies, But basically, Bitcoin doesn't, I would say Bitcoin doesn't have a tremendous amount of positive going for it, but it has zero negative, put it that way. Or Litecoin or Dash doesn't have massive assets that you're a part of, but it has great utility and no debt. And that's really the key. That's really the key. Great utility, no debt, security. So all of this will play into the banker's hands, because if you're burning the dollar, as shown in that image on the 1988 Economist, burning the dollar, burning all these other currencies, and you're allowing cryptos to a certain extent to rise, what a great transition point. And that's potentially what's going on. And it allows them to, and I say this as though it's a foregone conclusion. It is by no means a foregone conclusion. There's quite a good possibility that the entire market rejects the Fed coin. They can only bare their teeth so much, which are, guns and threats and everything else, because we've got a lot of tools now. We've got if you know what you're doing, and at some point I may go through this for those of you who don't know, but I would suspect a lot of you already do know. If you know what you're doing, it is super easy to go completely undercover with cryptos. You use a Monero, Zcash, PIVX, Dash with its more secrecy method. You could even use Bitcoin, but you'd have to be a little bit more careful. But with Monero, Zcash, Zero Coin, Verge, a bunch of projects, you could just fly under the radar and nobody's going to be able to detect you. I mean, virtually impossible. Even if they could detect you, they can't crack the transaction for the most part. BitBay has some of that capability too. In fact, the next release of BitBay, whenever that comes out, is probably going to have one of the class-leading secrecy capabilities. But that means that the bankers can only corral those people who love to be corralled and who love to pay the piper and be enslaved. And you know what? Sadly, to my shock, it's the bulk of humanity. It's the bulk of humanity who loves that. They want to be told what to do, and they want to, bow down to somebody in authority, member FDIC, something like that. Yeah. So anyway, that's what I'm suggesting is a distinct possibility. Let's see here. Okay, yeah. So I have more slides here. All right, here's what I want to talk about. This is pretty darn interesting. Okay. Bitcoin is orange. Can everybody see that? Maybe if I zoom in a little bit. View. Let's see here. Oh, shoot. You know what? If I do that, hold on here. Okay, you saw that. Yes, very interesting. Okay, so I dug deep. I found this chart. This is the DXY versus Bitcoin. Yeah. So Bitcoin rocketed up just as the dollar started coming down. This is what I hadn't found this chart before, but I said, that's what appears to be happening, behavior. So Bitcoin is becoming the anti-dollar. Now, that's what it was intended to be originally. It's exactly what it was intended to be originally. And that's, I think, a large part of what we've been talking about since I've, been with, I started when the chat room started, is that a lot of this rise is it's not even necessarily adoption, because Bitcoin especially hasn't penetrated more of the market. What's happened is people are, there's been a flood of currency produced, debt mostly, but currency produced since 2008, the financial crisis, 2009. That's when Bitcoin was birthed, because it was a response to that, as I've talked about. And you can see that, Bitcoin's movement was subdued while the dollar was rising. And as the dollar started falling, Bitcoin gained slope in the rise. You see that? Gained slope. Now, as the dollar rose again, Bitcoin lost slope. Now, this one tracks much closer. And here we're beginning to get this is sort of an inverse relationship. DXY is rising, but Bitcoin is all not it's 1-to-1. But here, that no longer, at this point, it no longer pertains. Right here, we've got downward trend and dramatic uptrend. So this is the most recent, even though that also applied to a certain extent here. So what this suggests is, at best, if the dollar gains value, Bitcoin can tread water. At worst, if the dollar tanks, Bitcoin can soar. And as I've shown here, QE started in 2008. Actually, really, QE started in 1971. But if you're going to look at official dates, 2008, 2009 in response to the financial crisis. They also had QE in response to the 2000 tech bust, but not at the level that we've seen. The QE took the form of mortgage-backed securities and things like that. But what I also talked about was I said, look, this is considered a relatively moderate downtrend. I mean, it's a significant one, but this is going parabolic to the upside. That's exactly what I was talking about. I was saying, if you try to make a one-to-one correlation, you're missing the point. You don't really understand the fundamentals. The fundamentals are the outside economy based on the dollar. You know, there are more dollars outside of the U.S. than in the U.S., okay, by a wide margin. But the outside economy based on the dollar, which is what this represents, the DXY, if you're forcing even a tiny sliver of that into the crypto world, you're blowing up the crypto world. Blowing it up. Way, way back, before all my slides were completely blown apart, I went over with those of you in the class, I don't know how many of you have been here since the very beginning, but you might recall where I was going through some of the numbers of the worldwide economy and the U.S. Debt and bond market and the stock market, and I was putting values not related to this, Ed, but I'll answer your question. They're buying mines, and they're buying land. That's what they're doing for the most part. They're buying mines or buying materials or buying land. Not necessarily related to this question, but this issue. So I'm not going to spend much time on that. But if those of you were in the chat room when I first started with this,